Hi, everybody. It is Third Coast Thursday. If you're watching the replay of this video, thank you so much. I'm really excited that you've tuned in. I am Angela Young Smucker. I'm the executive director of Third Coast Baroque, and this is our Thursday web series live streaming on Facebook and YouTube at the same time. We are super pumped about that. If you're just tuning in, welcome. Make sure you say hi in the comments so we know who's here. And I am very excited to share a guest today. We have one of our board members, James Klock, who is also an educator, Renaissance man, I like to say. We're going to talk about his background in engineering and biology and education, and also his interests in wrestling and fencing. So I promise this is going to be a super fun conversation. And as we go along, just want to let you know if you have questions or comments and you put them in the chat below, I'll get to them as best I can. And if we don't get to your question or comment today, I'll make sure to follow up after the broadcast. Hi, John. Good to see you. Happy Thursday to you. Yay. John is one of our dedicated viewers. We thank you for being here. If you haven't already, make sure that you subscribe to any of our channels. If you're watching on YouTube, go ahead and click subscribe. If you're watching on Facebook, we hope you're already following us, but if you're not, please do. We're also on Instagram, and past broadcasts will be posted there as soon as possible. You can also join our mailing list by going to thirdcoastbaroque.org. We've got a contact button there. You can join the mailing list, find out what's going on. We're going to be having some really fun announcements coming up in the next few weeks. Hey, Timothy Lyon, how you doing, my friend? So glad you're here with us today. So no more of my yapping. Let's welcome my friend James Klock. Hi, James.
Hello.
Yay! How you doing, my friend?
I'm doing okay. How are you?
I'm great. The sun is starting to come out down here. And
Must be
we
nice.
it must be nice. I know it's been a little yucky and overcast up in Chicago.
A little bit, not too bad.
Yeah. Well, I'm really glad that you can be with me today to chat a little bit. Um, and let's just dig right in. Like, I want to know, first of all, what is your relationship with music? I know that you are an avid music appreciator,
hmm
but I want to know, like, when did this all start?
Sure. So I would say that my parents really have a role in being responsible for that because when I was a very young child, my mother and my stepfather were involved in community theater and did a lot of musicals. And one of their friends that they were in a community theater group with taught band at the elementary school I went to. So when I was in fourth grade, I started playing the clarinet. And then when I transitioned into high school, my band director in high school convinced me to pick up the saxophone instead because that's what the band needed. And I also played saxophone in the Northwestern University marching band.
I love it. And
Um,
I have to tell
yeah,
you, I've always thought the saxophone sounds like a velvet chainsaw in the best
if you do it
possible
right,
way.
yeah.
Anyway,
Yeah.
awesome.
So I've kept up playing wind instruments just as a very much an amateur.
Mhm.
And as my interest in early music really grew through college and after, I've expanded more into early instruments as well. So I actually have a simple wooden six-hole flute that I originally started playing Irish music on at one of the local Chicago area Irish bars. So I used to go to the sessions there and over play occasionally at the Irish American Heritage Center. And I recently, not too many years ago, got a cornetto. That's actually a 3D printed uh, medieval instrument.
I love it. I love it. I know you were showing us that the other day. That was so cool.
Yep.
That is amazing.
Yeah, it's a really interesting instrument.
Yeah, I love well, and folks, if you're not familiar with a cornetto, I think that they're really prominently featured in Monteverdi's Vespers.
Yes.
Oh my
Hmm.
gosh, just
Also,
so good.
the overture in Orfeo
Yes,
has a
absolutely.
brilliant, brilliant,
Da-da-da-dum.
yeah,
It's one of my
yeah. But
favorite licks.
absolutely. So for me, being an amateur participant in music has always been an important part of my life.
Mm-hmm.
My wife and I met through a singing group, and she really has helped take my love of early music and push it just a little bit later into the Baroque era.
We're gonna move you up. Maybe you'll get to the 20th century, 19th century.
Well, that's really interesting because I like modern classical music a lot more than she does.
Oh, are you talking like Elliot Carter? That's my realm of modern classical.
Sure, or Poulenc.
Okay, gotcha,
That
gotcha.
sort of when you start getting dissonant, she starts losing interest.
I don't know. Some of those Gesualdo pieces, they're pretty catchy. I think we're gonna have to pull some of those out. Um, so can you tell us a little bit about how you you mentioned to me the other day about
Mm,
how you got introduced to popular music. Can you talk about that a
yeah,
little bit? I think this is absolutely wonderful.
yeah. So I grew up just outside Detroit, and it was one of the things that was a little weird is that I grew up listening to a lot of Broadway music because of my parents' interest in community theater. And that's
Hmm.
sort of what we had on the record player. And gradually, I came to find the the Motown and oldies radio station, and that was sort of like my first popular music experience, kind of in junior high. And gradually, as I got more and more into, as I got further into high school, some of my friends started sort of dragging me forward into the contemporary music of the popular music of the 1980s. and
Yes,
so
let's
like
get that
yeah.
new wave going.
Exactly. Yeah, and so it was really, it's kind of fascinating to think back how like I was interested um in Motown and like some of the really cheesy 50s rock
Mm-hmm.
way before I ever got into kind of the music that I mostly listen to now if I'm just listening to modern popular music.
Mm-hmm. Oh my gosh, I love it. So, you mentioned being an amateur musician. Can you talk a little bit about, what that means and what it means to you?
Sure. Um, I think that the word amateur literally means to do something because you love it.
Mm,
So it comes from the Latin root for amore, right? And so the word refers to love. And
mm, I
I
love that.
really love making music. I'm not great at it, but um, there's all sorts of intonation problems, and my phrasing's not great. But I really enjoy doing it, and it's always something that has very much been a part of my life from a very young age.
Mm-hmm.
And the process of kind of rehearsing through something until I get to a point where I'm happy with how it sounds has always been this really fun journey. And
Mm.
you know, I haven't played in public in a couple of years now, but there's something that doing even just rehearsing, but especially performance, really gets my endorphins moving, right? And
Mm-hmm.
really makes it feels so relaxing to do,
Mm-hmm.
even when it can be stressful and hard if you're really trying to perform at a high level and you're someone of my skill set. But but it really is one of the most just exceptionally cathartic things that I have done in my life.
Oh my gosh. I love that because, we were talking with Anna Steinhoff on Tuesday, and she was
Mm-hmm.
talking about when she started off with the cello and how she would just cry before lessons and
Yeah.
cry when she would practice and play. And it sort of was a torturous moment at times.
Hmm.
And I know there are a lot of professional musicians out there that sort of feel tortured by their instrument, and it doesn't always, bring that sense of relief or relaxation,
Mm.
but I love that it does that for you. And I
Yeah, for
know you're
sure.
not alone with that. A lot of people find it really relaxing. I actually sat down last week or maybe over the weekend. I had this itch to play the piano, which I haven't really played for a while. And that was my primary instrument growing up, right?
Mm.
And so I had asked one of our other board members, Yuri, for a recommendation, what to get back into, and he recommended Beethoven's The Tempest. So I pulled that up on IMSLP, and I was like, okay, we're gonna roll some chords here. But
Nice.
I found that so pleasurable, and I mean, my piano skills are fine, but they're not great. But it was amazing to get that sense of like, oh yeah, this is challenging, but it's fun and there's no
Hmm.
pressure. Oh my gosh. So
Yeah.
so you still sing and play in some amateur groups though, yeah?
I'm not currently active in any group. I sort of put a lot of that on hold when I started working on my PhD, and so
Oh
finding the
yeah.
time to do everything all at once is kind of tricky. And
Yeah,
I will
let's
say
talk
that, like,
about that.
sure.
We I want to so yeah, I want to talk about this whole journey that you've taken with different fields of study. I know
Hmm.
that you've studied engineering and biology, and then you've become a full-time educator. But so,
Hmm.
which came first, engineering or biology?
It was the engineering first. So
Okay.
my first degree was at Northwestern University as a environmental engineer. So that has a lot to do with like pollution control and wastewater management. One
Oh,
of my friends who I was in my program with, as soon as he graduated, he joined the Peace Corps and started building sewer systems in countries where they didn't have adequate sewerage.
oh my gosh.
And that's sort of where my background and training was. But it turns out, like, I really enjoy thinking like an engineer, but I don't love that work. So I,
I get that. Again, that's how I
yeah,
felt about the piano.
right. And so I transitioned from that into pursuing a degree in ecology, and went to UIC in their PhD program in ecology and evolution for a few years. And
Hmm.
then we all know, I'm sure you could speak on it as well, what a difficult career academia can be right now. And I
Yes.
think I kind of saw that from even back in sort of 2000 2001, and figured out that that wasn't also was not the life I wanted to have for myself.
Hmm.
So I left that program, and after a little while, kind of just doing IT work to pay some bills, I
Hmm.
got into teaching. I got into a teaching program that was sort of an accelerated program for math and science teachers.
Hmm.
And I've been teaching in Chicago public schools for the last 14 years now, and
Wow.
it's an incredibly tough job, but I love doing it.
Yeah. Well, and so right now with the stay-at-home order in Illinois,
Hmm.
you are now teaching from home. Um,
That's right.
and so when did
Welcome to my classroom, everyone.
right? All right, Dr. Clock.
Not yet.
Um, so when did you start teaching from home?
So the schools were shut down on May 17th,
Hmm.
and we resumed
Or March
remote
17th?
learning March 17th. You're right.
Yep.
Sorry, and
That's
we
okay.
resumed remote learning about 2 weeks later.
Okay.
So near the end of March, we sort of started back up.
Hmm.
I guess actually most of my classes, I teach one class that's a biology class through the city colleges taught at CPS campuses.
Uh-huh.
Called a dual credit program. And so that
Okay.
class actually started back in before the rest of my classes did, in sort of mid-April.
Awesome. So, and let me back up just a second. So, how did
Mhm.
you, when you were thinking of applying for teaching jobs, were you thinking CPS all the way, or were you just sort of casting a net?
Well, the teaching program that I went through specifically required me to commit to 5 years in CPS.
Oh, okay, great. And then you just hung your hat there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh my
I'm
gosh.
super proud of the work that we do at my school. TCB, of course, has performed once at Benito Juarez.
Yeah.
Um, and it's just an amazing community, and
Mm.
I'm really, really excited to be working with these folks.
Oh, I love it. So, so remind me of the courses that you teach there at Benito Juarez.
Mm. Yeah. So for most of my teaching career, I've been teaching math and then a little bit of biology as well, occasionally an environmental science class. But
Mm-hmm.
this last year, in the fall of 2018, we launched a solar electrical program. And so I teach that as a 3 year program where
Wow.
we have a partnership with the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, and students of mine, when they graduate, have the opportunity to enter the electricians union with their solar pathway already started so that they can become solar installers as an early part of their electrical career.
Oh my gosh, I love that.
Yeah,
I'm somebody who I want practical skills, you know. As an
right.
artist, I'm like, give me practical skills. How am I going to make a living when I after I get that diploma? You know, I think
Mhm.
that's amazing. I
Yeah, it really is a great
love
program.
that. I love that. Oh my gosh. So, you know, you mentioned that Third Coast played out at Benito Juarez. We did some
Hmm.
outreach there and we did a concert
Hmm.
there. Um, but that was not how you got connected with Third Coast. Can you kind of talk about your Third Coast Baroque origin story? Oh, and actually,
Sure.
before you get into that, I want to say one of our dear friends, Nicholas
Hmm.
Diarchangelis, is tuning in. Hi, Nicholas. Good to see you. We hope that the West Coast is treating you well, and we look forward to seeing you back in Chicago soon.
Yeah.
But James, back to you. I
Yes.
want to know. Tell us your origin story.
Fair enough. So my wife Sarah and I have been supporters and concert goers for lots of early music in Chicago for many, many years.
Mm-hmm.
Music of the Baroque and the Haymarket Opera and the Newbury Consort are all definitely very much on our regular rotation.
Mm-hmm.
And we've been contributors to each of those groups at some point or another, and most of them still currently. So when Sarah saw an ad for the first Third Coast Baroque concert for Sarabanda, she pointed to it and said, "We should go to that. It's got everyone we know, all the musicians, you and Natalie and Craig Trumpeter was playing in that concert."
Usual
Um,
suspects.
yeah, the usual, right. And so we went to the Tuesday night concert of that at St. Chrysostom's, and we were just absolutely blown away by that repertoire and by the quality of the performance. And because we got there just a little bit late, there weren't a lot of great seats, so we sat in the very front row, sort of just behind Yuri's microphones. And
Nice.
and at one point at the end of a tune, Ruben Dubrovsky just reached over the pew and shook our hands and said, "Hello." It was just the
I
most
mean, this
charming
is
thing.
being that is definitely being in dialogue with the audience right there. It's an
Right.
interactive experience.
Right. And so, we became contributors to Third Coast Baroque that night,
Oh,
made our first contribution then. And then you started talking to me about how I could get more involved in the group. And so the second concert series, oh, and I should say, we also, like, the thing about Sarabanda is that Sarah and I have both performed Gaspar Fernandez's repertoire and, have been big fans of that particular composer for a very long time, and I know that it's a little bit uncommon,
mm-hmm.
um, but it's definitely music that we really love, and
Mm.
as well as Monteverdi. And so the way that Ruben was able to bring those two composers into conversation with each other just absolutely blew our minds. So I then sort of gave a little bit of production assistance to the second concert series, to
Right.
Groove. So you
Yes.
asked me to just kind of be the person, sitting out in the pews while you were during the rehearsal process,
Mm-hmm.
so that if there were things that needed taking care of, there was someone who could take care of them.
Mm-hmm.
And that was such an amazing gift. It was so, it was absolutely one of the most memorable experiences to be in that space, listening to the rehearsal process and seeing how Ruben was taking these ideas and putting them all together, and working with various artists to bring things out of them that I think in some cases the you guys didn't know you had in you until he
Absolutely.
pushed and prodded at a particular idea, and it was just incredible to be
Mm.
part of that experience and to see that show coming together.
Oh
And I still think that the Passacaglia that Marty Davids played
man. Mm.
in Groove is one of the best things I've ever put in my ears.
Oh yeah, the Bieber Passacaglia.
Yeah.
It's a good tune.
It
Um,
sure is.
I love what you said about it being a gift to you.
Mm,
Experiencing that as a gift. I mean, we don't always think of it that way. We think about people giving to the organization and supporting
right.
the organization because we absolutely do need that mix of financial gifts, supporting a nonprofit, just straight up
Yeah.
doing that. But we don't always think about how our audience and our supporters, and our volunteers, how they see that and feel that experience as a
Mm.
gift to themselves. I love that. I think that's my new bumper sticker. I gotta shorten it, but um
Yeah.
I love it. I love it.
Well,
So that's right. I'm sorry, go ahead.
part of that is that I think for me, even though I'm an amateur musician, I've had an opportunity to work with some amazing conductors over time, right? And especially when
Mm-hmm.
I was in college and just after I was in college, where you know John Philip Painter was the director of bands at Northwestern and just an amazing conductor. And I was able to perform under his baton, and the things that he could bring out of me was just so much more than I ever knew I could do. And Steve
Mm-hmm.
Peterson, who is now the director of bands at the University of Illinois, was also at Northwestern at that time. And so those were some real heavy hitters. And there were a few friends I had who were doing PhDs in conducting, who I was able to sing for one of them, as part of like her dissertation recital.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so having been through that experience of being pushed by a conductor to things that you know that I wasn't prepared to give,
Mm-hmm.
and feeling how great that felt. It was wonderful to see behind the practice and see how Ruben is able to, he comes in with some ideas, but he also, the rehearsal process with TCB is so generative, right? There's so much
Mm.
that happens in that, um, where it's not just everyone comes in knowing the piece and you play it a couple times for balance.
Mm-hmm.
There's so much that happens and so much work gets put in to the rehearsal process within this organization that it's really an incredible thing to see.
Yeah, well, and just to sort of give people an idea of what that rehearsal process looks like, we operate on what we call a fly-in model. And
Mm-hmm.
what that means is, well, usually what it means is that the artists fly in, and we're here in one place together working for a week, and we do the shows on the weekend, and then we fly to the next thing. Well, our fly-in model is mostly our artistic director flying in from Vienna, Austria, and being with us for a week or so. But yeah, we usually get like 3 days of rehearsal, maybe four if we're lucky,
Mm-hmm.
and then 2 or 3 days of performance. So it's all very, very fast.
Mm-hmm.
And it's absolutely, I'll sit back every now and again and just sort of think about the progression just from that first rehearsal to the last, and
Mm.
woof. there's a lot that happens in those few
Yeah,
days.
for sure. It's so intense. And I've had an opportunity in a couple of other concert series to be present at some of the rehearsals, and the intensity that's happening in that room is so phenomenal.
Oh.
And I know that as a board member, I know that we have worked hard to make sure that we're prioritizing the amount of rehearsal time that's needed to make that kind of thing happen,
Mm-hmm.
even in terms of how we budget.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I mean, I think it's a hard balance. It's a hard balance to make sure that you're paying people fairly. Um, you also give the music enough time to rehearse and
Hmm.
grow, and just sort of settle, so we can present it in its most organic and authentic way. And
Hmm.
so, yeah, I think, just to toot our board's horn for just a second, I have to say I've been really pleased with how thoughtful and careful everyone is thinking about and balancing those two things, because
Hmm.
our artists in Chicago, our local artists, are working at capacity. I mean, in normal
Hmm.
circumstances, when they're working, they are working every single minute. Um,
Hmm.
Trying to, as freelance artists, they are trying to make ends meet. They're trying to put together a full-time income by stacking different kinds of gigs. And so, yeah, I'm really proud of the work that we've done as a board and as an organization to support these artists. And I've mentioned before in these live streams about the artist support fund that we've started and have continued to contribute toward. And that's going to be, like I said, that fund is here now and forever, amen.
Hmm.
So, and those funds go directly toward artist pay, which is the bulk of our budget, really, at this point. So there's some nerdy stuff for all of you folks who are watching now.
Yeah,
The
speaking of
nitty
seeing
gritty
behind,
nonprofit talk.
yeah, speaking of seeing behind the
The
screen, and
curtain, yeah.
yeah.
There's some dude who's, like, pulling all the levers and pushing all the buttons, making it go.
I thought you were going to say there's some dude who's like really getting into us nerding out about board work, and to that nerd, I say, join our board.
Well, I know one of them's already on the board, John. But yes, that's actually something worth mentioning. Um, you know, James, I was saying this when we were talking earlier. Um, our Third Coast Thursday series, part of what I have been so excited about is the fact that currently we're talking to our board members. We're going to be talking to other members of our Third Coast community in the future,
Hmm.
but um, if folks think, I don't know what sort of preconceived notions people have about being on a nonprofit board or on a performing
Mm.
arts board of directors and what that means. Like, if they think they have to have, like $1 million in their checking account or something in order to be part of a board or to make a difference with a nonprofit organization. Yeah, right. So, you know, what it to me, what it shows is that it is you bringing your gifts to the organization. And so, actually, James, can you talk a little bit more about what you've currently been doing to support Third Coast Baroque as a board member and the organization?
Sure. So I think that, we've had a lot of work to do with the COVID-19 emergency and figuring out kind of how to maintain a sustainable organization through these really difficult times. And so, I know that my fellow board member, our treasurer, Sarah Perry Wilson, has been amazing, and she's working really hard in her job as well to do a lot of the same kind of work, but she's brought in so much support from outside the organization in terms of her grant writing abilities and the things that she's been able to line up for us and stay on top of in terms of like what our other options are. Um, I think that we've met a bunch of times, like a lot more often than normal, to talk about the very painful decision to postpone Welcome Back Vivaldi,
Mm-hmm.
which, I'm super looking forward to seeing what you're going to do with that repertoire.
Me too.
And to talk about, we've had to make some decisions in terms of long-term financial planning. And I'm super proud of the fact that, we as a board decided to take our spring fundraising drive and turn it 100% into the artist support fund. I think that that's really like we were all, there's some differences of opinion within that board, to be sure, but we're all very much of the mindset that the artists are the organization, and we need to make sure that the people who we rely upon to be the performers in our concerts have to be taken care of right now, and that's the most important thing to us. Because fundamentally, nonprofit organizations tend to be about human connections, and music is absolutely an example of a human connection. So, it's really important to me that, and I'm really, really grateful that our board really is of one mind on these issues of like how to create a sustainable organization and weather this storm and come out of it with a vision for what comes next.
Yeah. Well, and can you also talk about sort of your hands-on work that you do during concert weeks?
Sure. So my wife Sarah and I actually have taken over the box office responsibilities as well, and so that's a way that she and I both really enjoy contributing to the organization and to making performances go. So in the last, I guess, everything we've performed in the last 2 years, there's been a production manager, and that's been great to have. Prior to that, kind of, I was trying to fill some of that without really knowing how to do it.
That's okay. All of us are learning as we go.
Exactly. And so, for us to be able to take over the box office responsibilities, and, have that direct connection with the patrons who come to our shows, has been really, really special. So we've really gotten to recognize and to know a lot of our patrons, even, people who we've been seeing at other concerts for a decade,
Right.
And to really get to know them in a much more special way.
I love that. I love that. And I personally am so appreciative of all the work that you and Sarah both do to just sort of manage that right now. Here's another little nerdy fact for all of you folks who are watching. Uh, Being on a nonprofit board, sometimes that board is in different phases. And usually, when you're in a startup phase, we're still, early on in our existence. Our board is definitely a working board. And so people are giving, hands on support to the organization. And like James, you said, for instance, right now you've taken over the box office. Usually, larger organizations hire staff to do that. Eventually, we'll get there, but we're still growing. And so the fact that we've got a board member like you who can step up and pitch in and just really knock it out of the park every time, it's just amazing, and I love it. I love it.
Well, thank you. Yeah.
I want to take a pause for just 1 second because our friend Nicholas has a question. And so, Nicholas, I think what you're asking is about our use of period instruments. And is it a preference or is it a rule, whether to use period instruments versus non-period instruments? Yes, we primarily use historical instruments, either authentic instruments from the Baroque era in the 17th and 18th century or earlier, if they exist, or they're replicas. And I believe when we talked with Marty, his instrument that he's playing is an actual 18th century instrument, which is just so cool. I forgot to ask Anna about her instruments, if they're replicas or real deal. But yeah, and the reason that we do that is part of what's called historically informed performance. And so what that means is that we try to give as authentic of a sound as possible, because these are the instruments that the composers of that era were composing on, and that's the sound that they had in their ears. And so in order to recreate that for our audience, as authentically as possible, we want to get these instruments. And then it also spills over into how they're played, which is called performance practice. And it also spills over into vocal performance practice. Um, and just a sort of Reader's Digest history of this, the early music movement that promotes this kind of performance started, I believe, in the late 50s, early 60s.
Yep.
And ultimately, it was essentially folks, scholars, academics, musicians getting into old documents and treatises written about how things should be played. It's sort of like old method books, right? And it was talking about, when you see this kind of musical gesture come up, or you're coming to the end of a phrase, you should do X, Y, and Z,
Hmm.
or A, B, and C. So you would have options. But yeah, so there's a with an ensemble like ours, which is specializes in period instruments, period performance. Yeah, we usually use period instruments. However, thinking ahead toward projects in the future, I think that um, there's the potential for collaboration with new and
Mm-hmm.
modern instruments. So you never know. You never
Well,
know.
and there,
So James, get that saxophone ready.
you don't want that. Um, but there's also some interesting things. Like I've heard, like the string players who perform with Third Coast Baroque, like trading notes on who's making good Baroque bows, right? So
Oh
it's not,
yeah.
not just the instruments, but also the bows. And we do have, there have been some times where we've used this really interesting organ. I don't know if you want to get into that.
Oh yes, I call it the toaster, but that's just that's a holdover from college when we had a really terrible in college we had this electronic harpsichord and it was
Wow.
yeah, and we it was like a big toaster. No, actually the electronic instrument that we have used in the past, it's an electronic keyboard, and it's owned by our concertmaster Marty Davids. I think it's a great piece of technology.
Hmm.
It is fired up by essentially an iPad, and it has digital samples of different Baroque keyboard instruments. So you have different kinds of harpsichords, you have different kinds of organs,
Hmm.
um, and so they're not it's authentic recordings of
Hmm.
these sounds, fed into this magic technology machine, and it's in a beautiful beautiful wooden case like you would
Hmm.
find for an organ. I love it. There are people on both sides of this argument about using a 21st century instrument to sort of mimic an old instrument. Um,
Well, it's not even mimicking, it's really reconstructing the
sure.
sound of that instrument
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
because it's a recording of another instrument.
Exactly. Well, and it's sort of to me this sort of falls into the same category of the discussion of people using iPads versus paper
Mm.
scores. You
Hmm.
know, there's concern
Real
about, well,
inside
what if
baseball stuff here, by the
I
way.
know. And speaking of baseball, I'm sorry, but the automatic walk needs to go away. That's a whole we're going to save that for another episode. When
Fair enough.
baseball
Yeah,
season
I'm
starts
probably
up
not the
again,
right
let
person
me
to
tell
talk to
you.
about that one.
That's all right. I'll get Ruben Valenzuela of the Baclay Game San Diego. We'll get him on here and we'll talk Baroque and baseball. I promise.
Great.
Um, but yeah, so I think there are challenges with any kind of instrument that you have, and it's just going to be a
Hmm.
different flavor. And I think ultimately it comes down to taste. Sometimes it comes down to budget. and availability, that kind of thing.
Mhm.
But yeah, I love. Thanks, Tim. We'll get you on. We'll talk about baseball. We'll have a whole baseball
Nice.
episode.
Well, and having been involved a little bit in assisting the production of some of our performances, I can say that one of the hardest things for a group of our scale is dealing with the keyboard instruments. Um,
Yep.
a lot of the portative organs that we could use, we have to carry from one space to another. And often they're being rented from places that are not, inside the city. And so there can be a whole production just in like acquiring and moving a keyboard instrument, right? And so, you know,
It's
that's
super
something
fun.
that being able to solve all of those problems just by saying, all right, we're going to use Marty's keyboard
And throw it in
can be
somebody's
really,
trunk.
really useful,
And
right? Yeah.
it's great. It is great. Oh, I love it. I want to switch gears just for a second.
Sure.
And I want to ask you what you're looking forward to in the after of all of this. Is there with Third Coast, is there something in particular that you can talk about that you're looking forward to?
I am super excited about live music again. There've been a number of efforts, one way and another, to bring performances into spaces where people can see them on the internet, and that's been great. My wife and I were just watching a New York City Ballet performance yesterday that they've made available, and that's nice. But there's nothing like being in the room. The energy that I get from the performers on the stage, and that's so special, and it just cannot be reproduced through speakers.
Yeah.
There's something about that live performance and being in the space that is incredibly special, and I'm so hungry for it.
I think
So
we all are.
yeah, that's really what I'm looking forward to, is just being in a space with musicians making music again.
Oh my gosh. I think that's a very beautiful sentiment to end on today.
Okay.
Thank you so much for joining me today. This has been so
My
great to
pleasure.
sit and
This has been
talk with
fun.
you. I love it. I love it.
Yeah.
And thank you to everybody who's watching. If you're watching on the replay or watching live, we're so glad that you took some time to join us today. Just a couple announcements before we go. Make sure that you do subscribe at our website or on any of our social media channels. We want to keep in touch with you. And also to let you know what's going on next week. So we have a little change in our schedule. Next Tuesday, we'll actually have part 2 of our Meet the Artist with the one and only Ruben Jabrowski. The maestro is coming back. We're going to talk.
Excellent.
We're going to answer some questions that we didn't have time to get to in our first round, which has now been a month ago. It's crazy. And then a week from today, our next Third Coast Thursday will be with another board member, Frank DiVincentis, who is also a trained classical singer. So we're going to talk to him about how he balances work in the finance sector with performance. So that's going to be a lot of fun. We hope that you'll catch up on past episodes. You can go to any of our social media channels or our website and find out how to watch past episodes. And we also invite you to support Third Coast Baroque. As James mentioned, our artists are critical to what we do, and we just recently established our Third Coast Baroque Artist Support Fund. So if you want to give directly to that fund, all you have to do is signify that when you make your donation online or by check or whatever. But either way, your gift will go directly toward artist pay now and in the future. So we thank you to everybody who's already donated. We made our match in about a week. And so we've got some great seed money in that fund. Isn't it incredible? I love it. So we thank you to everybody who has donated. And with that, James, thank you so much. I wish you the
You're very
best
welcome.
in your remaining 6 weeks of teaching online.
It's going to be hard, but we're going to get through it.
It's going to be great. You've got lots of moral support behind you.
Thank you.
And everybody who's watching, thanks so much. We'll see you next time.